Hello and welcome to this video. This video is going to be my first proper reaction video. I have done 2 reaction videos already, but that's where 2 idiot YouTubers have had a go at me and I've had to retaliate. But I'm not here to retaliate here. I am going to react against this video by the great Rick Beato. So this is my first proper reaction video. Now, I've never fancied doing reaction videos because you have to do a whole bunch of clever stuff to get the screen grab and put it in with the camera and then try and sync it all up. And I don't like all that. It's not organic enough for me. So I've come up with this very technological way of doing a reaction video, which is I've got it on my TV and I'm going to react to it. I have got a pointy stick as well, which means I can point to things like that's his pocket button there. There's another one matching there, white. He's got denim on, he's got the black t-shirt underneath. So I can point to things in the screen. I probably could digitally, but it'd be too hard for me. So shall I get on with this? Now this video is called, what the hell's it called? It's something. It's called the real reason why music is getting worse, and it's currently had 2.8 million views, right? This is right at the beginning. This is the very first frame of the video. If you notice, there's certain things in the picture. You have Rick, of course, here, and he's looking quite vampiric, I think, in this opening shot. He's got the Nosferatu claws out. He's got the sort of swept back white hair, and I could almost see the little Dracula teeth inside. You know, and this represents the older man staying young, I think. He's staying young by sucking the blood juice from the contemporary music scene as he leeches it off it in his old age. In the background, we have this painting here. And this painting is a sort of like that sort of mid, 19th century sort of romantic landscape painting in the style of Constable or Turner. And I would say that more than anything else represents fine art. That is the classic modernist view of what fine art is. Down in the little corner here, we have a record next to his record player. What's Rick been listening to? Not Joe Pass. No, he's been listening to Genesis. That's Selling England by the Pound. Now, as we go forward on this reaction video, I've got to say that Rick is a hero of mine. That man is a hero of mine. And because he's done this, I've done exactly the same thing. So I have a painting up here, right? Can you see the painting? I've got mine's a painting of John Coltrane, which represents the high end of musical achievement for me. And I've also put a Genesis album. I haven't gone for Selling England by the Pound, but I've gone for one that's got a similar sort of yellowy look to it, which is Trick of the Tail. So I'm all ready to react to Rick. Whatever I say negative, even if I call him a vampire and a leech, you've got to remember that I love Rick Beato and I've copied him so much on this channel. Shall we start going ahead then? Right, I'm sorry if the audio's a bit bad on this, but this is what you're going to get. This is an experiment, this is. It's an experiment in reacting. Where are you, Rick?
Today, this video is on the history of the music business and technology in 2 acts.
2 acts?
Act 1.
2 acts? Right, so he's got an act 1 and an act 2. This is very prog, isn't it? I like this. I like the fact that he's got an act 1 and an act 2. It's almost like an opera, isn't it? This is, or theatre piece. It's very, very, very great. And this one's called Music is Too Easy to Make.
Music is too easy to make.
I just said that.
What do I mean by music is too easy to make? Let's just go back to the 1940s and 50s. Frank Sinatra.
Right, Rick's doing stuff here. He's not just, when he said he's going to go back to the 1950s, you can see he actually has, and now he's on an old-fashioned television. Now, I know a YouTuber has done this a number of times, this type of stuff. I tell you, I have. I'm the one who's created this. He's never done this before. He's just usually in his studio. Where's all this coming from? That's what I want to know. That's the real reason why I'm reacting to this. Where's he got all this idea from? Makes you think, doesn't it?
Used to get up in front of an orchestra and sing a vocal take, and they had 1 microphone. And they would get it balanced just right. Frank would say, okay, I'm ready to do it, and he'd sing.
Come fly with me, let's float down to Peru.
Then you get into the 1960s or so, and then you have things where you have multi-track machines. You could go in if you had a mistake in a vocal part or any instrument, and you do a punch-in. Oh, I don't like that word. I sang out of tune, or I want to change this lyric. You go in and you just punch in, fix the line, punch out. Fast.
Now, this is interesting because Rick's explaining, I've gone serious now. Rick's explaining the history of music. And of course, one of the things he can't include is the shock of the new when Frank Sinatra gets up and sings that song with a microphone, and he sings it in one take, because that was different to what went before. What went before is the only way of recording something would have been to write it down on music, and then the singer would have to sing in a predictable way, so the composer could write in a way predicting what the singer's going to sound like. So classical singers, which is basically what we're talking about, they have a much more predictable sound. Sinatra is very important because with the emergence of blues and jazz singers in the 1920s, especially singers like Billie Holiday, Bing Crosby, which are coming out, someone like Louis Armstrong, who learned how to use that microphone, and the fact that they had to go up close to create this intimate sound. Now, a singer like Al Jolson or Caruso, the singers that went before, they would have been able to fill a hall with their voice. Sinatra couldn't. He needed a microphone. It's a completely different thing. And so it's quite feasible that singers of the generation before would be looking at this as proof of music depreciating, or, you know, and that Rick's starting off with this and saying, well, these are the high point in music when musicians could just deliver stuff live. Well, of course, there was a point in time when that was the only music that existed. But it doesn't mean that this process of the generation looking at the next generation and seeing a depreciation in artistic quality wasn't the case, because this is the big argument of this. Is it actually getting worse, or is it just old men reacting to the fact that the world's changing? That is the fundamental question, philosophical question, that we need to apply to this video once we start to get going. And so when the Beatles arrive in the 60s, there's multi-tracking. Yes, they can redo their takes, but there's another set of skills that they require that Frank Sinatra didn't have. Actually, when Frank Sinatra started to make albums in the 60s, which were themed, you know, so he would come out with an album about songs for the night time or something like this, or in the wee hours. That was the first time anyone had considered an album and the conceptual continuity that exists within an album. And so there's certain things now traveling from Sinatra across to the Beatles. Anyway, there's a bit of background. Let's see what he's saying now.
Believe song. They invented this thing, Autotune. I've talked about this a million times on here, but Autotune was a plug-in that would go into these DAWs, digital audio workstations. So you'd have something like Pro Tools or Logic or Ableton. What you do is you take the vocal, let's say the song's in C major. Any note in the key of C major, it would tune the note to. Well, T-Pain and people like that realized if you put it on a really hard tuning, it would make it sound like a keyboard. And that's what they did in the Believe song. Well, then the same thing starts happening with drum parts. Guys playing a drum part, and you're like, you know what? This would be a great take of this first verse if this one hi-hat wasn't a little drag. Well, let's move it back a little bit, or let's move it forward, whatever. And then you move that, and you're like, well, the snare after it kind of sounds weird because we moved that forward. Now the snare sounds like it's drag, so we do that. Then you're like, well...
Right, so now he's moved on to digital recording. I've talked about this a lot on the channel here, the fact that that can be used to do all sorts of trickery. And so, yes, it is the case that people don't have to be able to perform in the same way as Frank Sinatra had to perform, or the Beatles. But remember, the Beatles couldn't perform like Frank Sinatra. And remember, Sinatra couldn't perform like Al Jolson, and Al Jolson couldn't perform like Caruso. There is a change in performance styles. And one of the things because I'm playing devil's advocate here, because obviously I'm on Rick's side, you know, being another, you know, sort of entitled white middle-aged man. So, you know, we've got to stick together. But to play devil's advocate, if you got anybody off the street and got them to try and play the drums or guitar on a record back in the 1960s, they wouldn't be able to do it. And by the same token, if you got someone off the street and dropped them in front of a computer with Pro Tools or the one that they all used to have. Oh, I nearly sounded like I knew what I was talking about then. I can't remember what it's called. The door that you can put all loops into. That one. See, Rick doesn't do this. He'd stop now and he'd look it up on the internet and he'd remember it. Anyway, if you got someone on the street and stuck them in front of a door and asked them to produce a pop hit, they wouldn't be able to do it. I'll tell you why, because it requires incredible skill to do that, right? working with students who want to work in hip hop and dance music and all that type of stuff, they could work really hard and get 25% there, 30% there, but they're not fully there because there's too much to learn, too much to understand, and too much to know. So again, is it the fact that the skills are getting worse, or is it the fact that just the skills are changing? Let's carry on, shall we?
Grid lines, the bar lines, we'll just move them to that. Then you start cutting out, moving them. Then they give you this tool called Beat Detective. Then you can actually quantize an
evil Beat Detective.
Then it becomes like a drum machine. So it's not human-like. Here's an example of a quantized drum part. It's John Bonham's drum performance from Fool in the Rain. That's a shuffle. Here's what it sounds like as a machine. Now here's the actual human performance of John Bonham. Notice the swing in it.
Well, we can't notice it because they put an advert on.
If you book with TUI, you can fly from your local airport.
So I think there's a little bit of, I am going to not push back again.
Once you quantize the drum part, it's a drum machine. It's just like Superior Drums.
Now, I hate this. I mean, I got to a point, probably 10, 15 years ago, I actually stopped playing in prog bands because they were all doing this. And I thought, what is the point in me carting my drums down to a recording studio, working really hard and putting the drum part in for them to just go away and re-trigger everything and quantize everything? So I'm totally with this with Rick. But again, there is a little bit of iconoclasm going on. Iconoclasm. Oh, sorry, Rick. This is what my videos are like. Anyway, where are we? This idea we're going to take John Bonham, the greatest drummer in history, the greatest rock drummer in history, and we're going to take one of his sacred drum parts and we're going to stick it into a computer and drag all the humanity out of it. This idea that that's been done to John Bonham, and it's almost like a heresy. There is nothing wrong if you want to do that. If you want to sample John Bonham, if you want to tighten it all to the grid or not tighten it all to the grid, you got to remember, we don't want to be putting up rules that stop people from being creative. And when somebody starts to say you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, that's precisely what is happening. People should be able to have the choice of doing all these things. And of course, if we step back a little bit, there could well be people sat there going, well, I actually quite like the John Bonham one where it's quantized, and the other one sounded a bit fluid and lumpy. And the last thing I want to say is Fall in the Rain. The reason why they're talking about it is because a long time ago they stuck the drum parts up on YouTube, so everyone heard them on their own, right? And it's amazing. He's copying a drum beat by Bernard Purdie. There's a whole history of this halftime shuffle, and drummers are really into it, and then and Jeff Porcaro copied it for Rosanna in Toto. So there's this beat, and drummers love this beat. But the track Fall in the Rain is not particularly great. It's not off one of their decent albums. I always thought Fall in the Rain was one of the most, insipid Led Zeppelin tracks of all time. So it champions something as being great, but is it really that great? Is it really?
2000 or so is that everyone started quantizing their drums because the budgets to hire session guys like Josh Freese and Kenny Aronoff went away, and you'd have to use the crappy drummers. I mean, some bands would have good enough drummers to play, but you typically have these crappy drummers that you'd have.
Yeah, so they used to have budgets to do production. The record companies were making a lot of money out of records in the old days, and they had budgets. I'm going to show you how you can see the evidence of this. It's here. And it's here. Rick Beato, that guy is not Rick Rubin. This is a middling, music producer. He's done some great stuff, but he's middling. And yet he has been able to amass all this stuff, right? That's no longer happening, right? It has changed. The money has gone elsewhere. But again, is it because the industry is dying, or is it because the money is no longer focused in trying to record a drummer, because that technology is not needed anymore because we have drum machines and things have moved on? All right. And do we have to realize that the drummer is a luxury at best and is probably the dodo of music at worst? We have to consider that because this video is either has got a solution to all of this, or it hasn't, and it's just moaning.
You start moving the
that
bass
life's
around,
changed.
you start moving the guitars around, and then you pretty much have sterile, generic, quantized rock music that has no vibe at all. The other thing that people realize is that it's really difficult and time-consuming to record a drum set. You need a studio and a lot of gear. Look at all these mics. Now, you can put up 3 mics and get a drum sound. You can put up 2 mics and get a drum sound. But to get a professional drum sound, you tend to mic up the different instruments.
Right, so there's another swizzle there, because he said you can record a drum kit on one mic and all that stuff, and you can. And then he says, but if you want a professional drum sound, you have to do a proper mic. That is a mindset that is actually going back over 30 years. And hip hop used real drummers, but they used them just with 1 mic or 2 mics. They used degraded drum sounds. And there was a point when the computers first kicked in the 90s where it was actually very exciting, because you could just set a drum kit up in a car park, which you couldn't do before with the old technology, get 1 mic and get a different type of drum sound. Also, people were sampling drum sounds, and the hip hop guys were sampling drum sounds, like James Brown drum beats, or going back to the meters, and they probably were only recorded with a couple of mics, 2 or 3 mics at most. You recorded on dynamic mics onto tape, and then they were sampling them onto samplers, 8-bit sampling that made them all grainy and degraded, and that became the sound. We have a choice to what we want to do as musicians, right? The next music that comes out will be the creative output of the young people, and they are allowed to do whatever they want to do. So maybe we need to be quiet about what used to happen and say this is the professional way. Maybe what we should be doing is actually just saying, do whatever you want to do. You don't have to get stuck in doing this, because there's either something unique about a drum kit that is so special that the kids will want to preserve it when they hear it, and you have to trust in that, and them going, oh, that's so cool, I love that. Or they'll go, I'm just not interested. And there'll be people with both opinions. You have to let people be open. And the trouble with this is, all of this is a little bit like, oh, it's all over, it's no good, they're not doing what they used to do anymore, which is fine, and I do it as well, and it brings the audiences in. I know if I came on here and moaned about how bad modern music is, I get a ton of views. But by the same token, me pushing it back against Rick Beato is also going to get me a ton of views, which is why I'm doing it. I only do stuff for the views. That's all I do it for. But I do say what I think, right? It's just that my opinion is more nuanced and complex than just being a black and white opinion. I can see actually both sides of the arguments. Can't we, Rick?
Strum, I got a mic on this tom, mic on that tom, mic on the ride, 2 mics on the overheads, 2 mics on the snare here. I actually have 3 mics on the snare, and a mic on the hi-hat, and I have a couple of room mics. It's hard to record it well. Not only is it hard to play the drums well, but it's hard to record the drums well, and you have to have training. It's not easy to do. You have a great ear. You got to know how to tune them. You got to know what is a good snare sound from a bad sound. You got to know if the toms are ringing too much. You got to know if they're in the right pitches, all this kind of stuff. There's so many decisions to make. Now,
and this is like a bit like a guy bringing back a guy that built the great sort of Gothic cathedrals and saying, you guys don't know what you got with your cranes and your ladders and your electric drills. We had to put up wooden scaffolding in the old days, and we had to work it all out. I didn't have a calculator. I had to work it out on a bit of paper, and I had a dangly bit of rope to know whether something was straight or not. And then we had to get all the rocks from miles away. The rocks, we had to roll them on logs all the way there, and people fell under the logs and they had their head crushed and they died, and we just picked them up and threw away. And you know how long it took to make one of those cathedrals? Only about 100 years. The people who started on it were dead by the time it got to the end of it. You guys know nothing with your buildings that can be built in a couple of months. It's absolutely ridiculous. You go, yeah, I know. And
what are you talking about, Rick? You don't need to have a good sounding room. You can have a crappy sounding room. You don't even need good mics, because you're going to just replace everything with samples. Well, where do you think samples come from? They come from people that know how to record them. That one was for free.
Some do.
It's difficult to
Some
get a
do.
good guitar
Not all
sound.
do.
You have to have a good sounding amp. You have to have good sounding speakers, good microphones that work well. Most
Now,
people now just use amp modelers. They plug into their computer, they pull up their program, everything is done for them. They've already been pre-mic'd, pre-selected. They're all using the same algorithms. They can create great sounds. They're so easy to use. Doesn't take any skill at all.
right, so he's focused on skill here, and I think he may come and say this in a bit. He may say the point I'm going to make. If you've got a less professional drum sound, say you've got a less professional sounding room and you've got a less professional drummer with a drum kit that's not probably tuned as great as it should be and not quite mic'd as it should be, and then a guitar amp in a room with a mic on, and none of it's quite right. You know what that'll sound like? It will sound like records from the 1960s, right? Because nobody really knew how to record the stuff properly then. You know, they were all scratching their heads, you know, like the Hollies that sat there saying, oh, you know, can we put a mic in the bass drum? Oh, I don't know if you can do that. Can you do that? When it break the mic? I don't know if you would. And all that's going on, right? So the thing is here is he's stressing this professionalism, he's stressing this skill level, and this will create this polished product. But actually, if you think about it, it's the incompetence of doing this that creates records that sound unique. The drum sound on an Aretha Franklin album is unique. It sounds nothing like the drum sound on a Led Zeppelin album, or nothing like the drum sound on, say, Otis Redding record. They're all different sounds. All the guitars are different sounds. Everything sounds unique. And back in the old days, studios would get famous, like Sun Studios would get famous because they had a certain sound, and you go there and then get that sound. And so really, rather than stressing professionalism and skill level, I think the thing that's missing from modern music is the uniqueness. Anybody who pulls up one of those guitar plugins and uses that to create an amp sound, they're going to have exactly the same sound, and you could recognize it. And I think Rick was the one who really introduced me to this idea of analyzing some of the early 90s rock and metal records, and noticing that they were triggering the same bass drum over and over again. We're hearing the same stuff over and over again.
Creativity either. Then of course you have the MIDI packs that you can buy if you can't play keyboards. So it'll just have pre-programmed chord progressions, because for some reason people can't just kind of space their fingers out and learn to play a few chords like that. Or maybe just experiment. What is this? What is this? In the early 2000s, labels stopped.
Right, so I'm the sort of person that had a keyboard and I just threaded my fingers out and hit it, and I like those chords. And for a good 10 years, I didn't even know the names of those chords. The only reason why I learned harmony was because I got offered a job teaching in a college where I was teaching drums and performance, and then they needed someone to teach jazz. I could play jazz drums, but I basically had to then start learning about harmony so I could teach it the next day in the class. So I'd be there going, that's what a dominant chord is. 1, 1st, 3rd, 5th, and a flat 7, I remember that, and tell them that tomorrow. That's what a dominant chord is. That's how I learnt my harmony. And then since then, I really studied it, and I know a reasonable amount about harmony now. But you have to remember that when you go back to a lot of the records he's talking about, right, if you listen to rock and roll or soul or metal, any of these records, they got the same chord progressions and nobody knew what they were. You know, everyone's saying about sort of originality, you know, but how many rock and roll records go, ba-dam, bam, ba-dam, bam, ba-dam, get, bam, dang, bam, down, dang, boom, you know, this is the thing about it. It's like, you know, it's like people who were playing hackneyed chord progressions that they just got them in a different way, you know. I mean, the Beatles' whole career was based on the fact that they went down to some record shop and they went in and some guy was playing a B minor 7 chord on guitar, and they went, what the hell's this? And they showed him the chord, and then they just decided to stick that in every record they've got, giving their sound, getting a certain sound. I think incompetence is a worthy thing, and all this pressure he's putting on skill might be missing the point, I think.
As it was way too resource intensive. It was far easier to sign artists that could make their own music using a laptop and a microphone. Why is this a bad thing? Well, let's start with the creative dependency on technology limits the ability of people to innovate, I believe. Could be wrong about that. Maybe it helps them innovate. I don't think so, though. The homogenization.
Right, this is totally wrong. Sorry, Rick, this bit's wrong, okay? You could tell he's done a bit of work in his studio. You know, he's walked around, he's got his lackeys to set up the mics on the drums, and he's pointed at them, and he's a little bit tired now because he is getting on, and he's gone out to sit in his lovely garden. And if you notice, he's sat in his garden, and he's got in the background up here what looks like a basketball court, right? He's got a basketball court in his garden, unless that's just over the fence and there happens to be one in this woodland idyll he lives in. Right? Look at his lawn. Right? This is you know, now, I mean, he's got to have made some money out of YouTube, hasn't he? Maybe he's got all this, maybe he didn't have this, but I feel he's already got this. Right, and so he can moan about it, but he's a lucky man, isn't he? I don't know, I find that difficult. The way he has earned this is by understanding the technology. So in the old days, a recording studio, it would cost £500,000 to set up a recording studio, to put all the gear in there. And because of that, there were only certain people who knew how to use it. And there were people who had access to the recording studio. So the recording studio was like a hallowed place. We could have all learned how to use it if we wanted to, but we couldn't because we didn't have access to it. The first time I went into a proper recording studio, not some 8-track set up above a shop, music shop or something like that, which is a desk and an 8-track, and that was it. First time I went on a proper with a patch bay and outboard effects, you know, in a great big live room, was when I went up to the old Smithy, which is just outside of Worcester. It's a studio that Judas Priest use, and I went in there in 1992. At that point, I was 24 years old. That was the first time I'd ever been in any sort of recording studio. And the guy that was working in there, he was pulling in wires and putting stuff into a patch bay. I didn't even know what a patch bay was. And he took this bass drum sound, and by putting all these wires in different holes, he made the bass drum sound amazing. And that was a skill. It was like, it was a skill that was cordoned off. And because it was cordoned off, these guys could charge a lot of money, because nobody knew how to do it. It was the only way, right? And the fact that this is gone, and now I've got a better recording studio in my garage than was in that old Smithy studio back then. They got a lovely studio now, by the way. But is a testament to how much things have changed. And if I could choose to go to one or the other, I would go to now, where I've got my studio, not have it that I've got to scrape together, you know, 300 or 400 quid to go to a studio to have one day in there and have all the creative control taken away by a guy that is just going through the motions and all this stuff that was wrong with this. So the idea that the technology has made it worse for people, I would say that the technology can make it worse or better. The technology will do whatever the zeitgeist is of the time, and what it will be, because we're not a collection of people like the cultural constructionists want to make out. Because we're all individuals, there will be kids who will enjoy making and creating music on a computer. There will be kids that will get their iPhone and they'll get GarageBand and they'll start plopping in notes and they'll do things like this. And maybe they get some MIDI packs, and maybe they start by learning to cobble together these things together, and then they look at the chords and then they start to recognize. And people, they do have an upward motivation towards excellence. That's what they do. And this is the big question. I haven't got any answers here. I'm just playing devil's advocate against this.
Over-reliance on similar tools, as I just brought up with the amp models, creates a lack of diversity. I think that leads to music becoming more formulaic and people just following trends of using certain types of sounds. This is why these trap beats have been in vogue for the last 20 years. People just, they know they work, so they just keep using them.
But I think the industry was always like that. That's always been the case.
Big thing. Okay, so the easier production makes the process go faster, which creates an oversaturation of music, making it harder to find really exceptional things, as Ted Gioia talks about in this clip.
This is Spotify's way of using AI. They have AI songs, they attribute them to people that don't exist, and this allows them to take royalties that would go to musicians.
Right, he's moving on to another area now. Now, we could say that with all the things that digital technologies have brought in to music, the biggest change probably is not the fact that there's digital recording, not the fact that there's even digital distribution, not even the fact that there's Spotify. The big difference is there is literally millions and millions of new songs out there, and millions of old songs out there, that we have taken the sort of pot of music that exists, that we have access to, and we have magnified it, to the power of 10 and power of 100. I don't even know what a power is really. But anyway, we magnified it by a huge amount. And with AI coming in, there is a future that we could describe where AI is basically creating the soundtrack for the person. It's that they feel that they own their own music. This is something that I don't think Ted Joyer really quite gets here. This idea that there will be an ownership in the person of their music. I've noticed already with non-musicians going, I've been on AI music and I've made this track, and they made this track by basically just putting keywords in, bands they like, styles they like, and mix it together, and then the AI's come up with something. And the AI as well is they are pretending it's doing something that it's not. The AI is a lot less complex than we think. There was a guy on YouTube recently that he went up to some AI music program and he said, can you create a track that's like a mixture of world music and jazz? And what came out was a track that sounded like Weather Report, in that the tone of the bass was the same as Jacko and the tone of the saxophone was the same as Wayne Shorter. It had copied it directly. So what it had done, rather than scanning the whole world to find out all the different stuff and then fusing it into this wonderful AI, mixture of, world music and jazz, it just gone, what's a big world music and jazz? Oh, it's this group called Weather Report. Well, just copy that then. That's all that's going on. And so it's still much more reliant on the artist to create. I think that the record companies will challenge this, but the reason they will challenge it is so that they can own it. So they have their old artists, they have the copyright on that, and then they can somehow make money again out of those old catalogues. Whether us people who aren't in that position will be able to access that, I don't know. But the jury's out in terms of AI. And I would like to think, because I know I come across a bit negative, but I would like to think that the aptitude for newness AI can't do. I just don't think it's going to be able to do. I've looked into it and experimented with it, and I think for the industry to keep moving forward, the reason why the record industry put loads of money all the way through its history into new bands wasn't because they were nice and they wanted to champion new music. It's because if they didn't, within a few years they would have been done. We need new music. And whether AI can come up with that, I just can't see how it can.
On the AI front related to music is too easy to make, I made a video last week called I Told You This Was Going to Happen, and I played some songs off Udio, and I was saying how my kids could detect that they were AI songs, but other people could not. Well, it just came out. All three major labels are suing AI startups for copyright infringement.
Here we go.
Universal Music Group, Sony Music, and Warner Music are suing Suno and Udio for copyright infringement because guess what? They're using all their music to train these AI models. Well, of course they are. How else are they going to train it? Now, companies like Universal are not doing it for the good of their music to protect their copyright owners. What's going on here is they just announced that they're partnering with a company called...
Yeah, he just said what I said. So I've got to agree with this bit. Because he's just said what I said. And this is where... But the thing is, with AI, is I think with Rick, there's always a focus on this skill level. And I'm the same. I came up listening to jazz and prog and fusion, and I'm one of those musicians that loves virtuoso music, and that's a big thing on my channel. But I've always been able to step back and realise that there is a yin to that yang. And the fact that, the fact that music is easy to make, you need to go back to that every now and then. Jazz existed because the original jazz that the spasm bands were doing and the New Orleans, marching bands were doing was easy to do. It was easy to do. That's what it was. Blues was easy to do. And then it becomes a sophisticated form. And when it becomes too sophisticated, the next generation come along and go, I can't express myself in that. I need something else. And they look around and they find something else. Whether it's skiffle, or whether it's rock and roll, or whether it's punk, or whether it's rave, techno, house music. This has happened over and over again. And you got to remember that the people who were making early house music and tech, they weren't even musicians, they were DJs that were just grabbing the technology and producing records that they could play in their club. Their skill was not being a musician. Their skill was to be able to know what would play out in a club. It's all so complex, this is. I don't think we can predict anything really. I think what we can do is try and open this idea that it's okay to do whatever you want, and to point that out, to point out where creativity resides rather than skill. Are you playing? No.
Sound Lab to make AI models of their artists for themselves. They can use this Sound Lab plugin in Pro Tools or Logic, and you can sing your own voice and replace it with one of their artists like Drake or Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish, or whoever agrees to this. And I guarantee you all these labels are going to do that because they want to own the AI versions of these songs. Whether you create it or whether they create it, they're going to own it. And just to show you how easy it is to model someone's voice with AI, I'm speaking to you through a voice modeling program called 11 Labs that was trained on my voice over a 4-week period. So for those of you that keep writing to me every day, I
How's
get
he
about
do
20
that?
of these a day, and they always start,
I can't do
I
that.
wrote a song that I think could be a hit. I used AI to hear it because I know nothing about making music. That's literally from an email I got yesterday. This reminds me of the best AI...
See, he answers that email and put it up. I put a lot more interesting and intelligent emails to Mr. Rick Beato in recent times, hoping that he would notice me and feature me on his amazing music channel. And he hasn't. You see, I have a love-hate relationship with this bloke. I do. This Rick is one of the reasons why I'm here doing it. And when I started to watch him, I loved his channel, like we all did, and I watched it all the time, and it was so addictive. And I started to wonder, why is it addictive and what's he doing? And I learned a lot from this guy. And I know that what he's saying here fundamentally is that the demographic that watches his channel, that's what they want to hear. And the demographic that watches my channel is similar, and that's what you guys want to hear. Not all of you, though. There's more open-minded people, and there's people who are more conservative. I'm a natural contrarian, and you may notice with this video that that's my personality, because when Rick says this, this video is really educational for me, right? I have friends and associates that really criticise him saying this. They've argued with everything on it. I don't see the world like that. He is in a position where he can start the conversation, and I'm carrying it on. When I first saw the video, this video came out a few months ago, weeks ago, month ago, something like that, and I didn't react straight away. And it's only because it's going to be going around in my mind, and the fact that some of the stuff, I've only watched it when it came out, and this is the second time I watched it, so I've forgotten some of the stuff. But you know, when I just parroted back that thing about the record companies are going to grab it for themselves, I've got it from Rick. I just didn't realise it. And this is where information now on YouTube and in Instagram and Facebook, this is the way information works, and it swirls around. This is the way the music works and swirls around. But fundamentally, because I'm not going to go any more deeper into this one, I may come and do some more. I really reacted to just the first act. So if you feel cheated, and I know in the second act, if my memory's right, he starts to talk about, you know, Spotify and the fact that that music's on tap, and it's worth delving into that as well. But my conclusion watching this video, if I'm serious, is that the future is ours, right? And the future is there for anybody who's still alive, whatever age. And this idea that youth are very important in music and that new music's very important is a product itself of the music period that he is celebrating here. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case. This idea that only young people can create, which I think has been one of the most poisonous things. Well, it's poisonous to me because I'm old now. I liked it when I was young. But now I'm old. I want to be able to have my creative work seriously, considered. It might be crap, but at least I want to be considered. I don't want somebody to just come along and go, that's an old bloke talking, just ignore him. You know, what's he going to say? He'll be dead soon or whatever. That's a poisonous idea. And so all of us should be able, in a liberal democratic society, to have access to creative making. And this is the central theme of my channel, and that's what I'm arguing for. And because it's essential for people's mental health, it's essential for people's well-being, it's essential for our understanding of what is good and bad, and therefore what is right and wrong in the world. Our morals are negotiated there. Our consideration of humanity is negotiated in there. And we need to keep that alive. And the ownership is with us. It does not matter what all of this says. If you want to have a real drum kit, have a real drum kit. If you want to record it with any old mics, record it with any old mics. If you want to use the computer or not use the computer. We are on a precipice where creativity is going to be handed out into the domain of the audience. That is fundamentally what's happening. It used to be owned by an elite, and those elites were worshipped, whether it was Hollywood and film stars or whether it was David Bowie and Robert Plant and the whole shebang that goes round, you know, that era of music. But now it is quite possible for people to be able to creatively make music and to sustain that through the technologies that exist now. That's precisely what I am doing. I make music and I make YouTube videos, and I have managed over the last few years to work ways to integrate those out. On Friday, I had a video come out which was called The 10 Most Overrated Guitarists in Music History. And after 4 hours of being up, it had had 25,000 views. The following day, I had a video that had taken far longer to make of a track with my Law of Three project. And after the same 4 hours, it had had 195 views. That's the difference. But I'm pleased for 195 views. I'm pleased that there's somebody there. All I need is somebody. All I need at the fundamental essence of being me, and I'm sure it's for a lot of people here that are watching this channel, is the ability to sustain my creative music making. I need to make money. I need to have the time and space to be able to do it. I need to be able to have the technology at my fingertips to be able to do it. I need to be able to reach an audience, right? I think all those are integral, and modern technology enables me to do that. In the old days, when I was in bands and we were writing songs in rehearsal rooms and then demoing and then sending tapes out and doing all that type of stuff, it was so much harder. There was so much more gatekeeping, and you had to jump through their hoops so much more than you do now. And I think that's the fundamental problem, is that Rick being a part of that world more than I was, and I was a part of it to some extent, you know. I mean, I did play with some big artists, I did record for labels, you know, I did put records out. I never had a hit record, you know. There was a whole number of things I did and a number of things I didn't, but I wasn't. You can tell by where I'm sat now and where Rick is sat here, that he was a lot more involved in it, and he laments certain things that I think we probably do need to let go of. And I think I think fundamentally for creative music makers, it's better now than it was fundamentally. And I think what I'm trying to say is I think that culturally there is going to be a shift over to art being out there. So we will perceive art a little bit like cottage industries, you know. So when you walk down into your town, you've got the great big, like, you know, supermarkets and shopping malls full of these huge, you know, organizations that span the world, and that is pop music. That is that's your Taylor Swifts, and that's your Kanye West, and there's that choice. Or you can go down to your local bakery and you can go in there and buy some nicer bread, but from someone who has made it themselves and is just feeding that little community. Now, our community will be online, it will be a creative community, and in the same way that local community can sustain that baker but cannot sustain the huge supermarket in that way, they have to operate completely different. And so Spotify, I've always believed, That's like trying to get your product into like Tesco's in the UK or Sainsbury's, and that's a certain deal. You know, if you're not making a product that's going to sell there, just don't go there. If you are, do. I've got no problem with Spotify, but don't use it. If you are making bespoke creative music which is individually yours, you go to Bandcamp, because Bandcamp is a lot closer to your little sort of art centre with all these little places in. And that's the way the music industry works. And I think it's far more important for us to be stating this on these videos than just being completely negative. I agree with everything that Rick's saying here. I can see where he's coming from. I've got no problem with what I'm saying. I'm just trying to add something to it from my end, and I'm hoping I'm adding something which is a little bit more positive. And if you are a creative musician or a fan of creative music, you walk away from this rather than being all stoked up and angry, that you are a little bit inspired, I hope, by this to go, yeah, Andy's right. You know, I can don't do what I want. If I've only got like 14 fans, what does it matter? Because it's all about sustaining your creativity. It's not about becoming a multimillionaire. If you want to become a multimillionaire, you need to do something else, right? You know, get involved in some, you know, international warfare, start selling arms or whatever it is that makes people very, very rich. But as creative types aren't interested in that, are we? We just want to have a way of being creative. That's all we want. Okay, so I've come to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did like it, put a like on it. If you like this type of reaction, I felt a lot more comfortable, and it felt a lot more like one of my normal videos doing it like this. I know this is absolutely archaic, but that's the same type of guy. I like things simple, and I like to be able to use a pokey stick, right? These are normally known as drumsticks, but today they're being used as a different function, the pokey stick. Now I was going to refer to the scene here. We've got that John Lennon drawing in the background. He loves these sort of you know, lights, doesn't he? He's got them everywhere. All this low light. Look at all these bloody lovely guitars. Look at that, right? And look at all these amps. And he's got a great big rug. I bet that rug there, I bet that's worth more than my house. It's probably worth more than my recording studio. But we love you, Rick. We do love you. You are the Don. Oh, that's my Genesis album gone now. Does it look like I'm talking to him? But he looks really small, doesn't he, compared to me? I like that. You are the Don, Rick. If you do watch this channel, we love you very much. Very, very much. And I didn't mean to question your authority with my, you know, comments. And the thing about you looking like Nosferatu, that was just a joke. You don't really look like Nosferatu. You look like an old, handsome man. That's what you look like the George Clooney of music YouTubers. That's where I'd put you. Do you think that's got me out? Do you think that's got me back in the good books? I wanted to be the George Clooney of music YouTubers. Don't tell Rick. Anyway, like the video, subscribe, come and support me on Patreon. My Patreon's kicking off. We're working on, at the moment, on the 20 most overrated albums in history. Not my choice, my patrons. We've had 40 people involved in this so far that have voted on it. They've come up with the choices, and now they're voting on it. And that's the next thing for me to do, is to have a look at that. And when we've got all the facts and figures in, I'll be doing that video, and I'm looking forward to it. And a couple of ones they've put on are albums I absolutely love. So my gut reaction was, oh, well, I just won't talk about those. I thought, well, no, you can't do that. You must talk about them anyway. That's what we're doing. So become a patron, come and join the fun. And also, if you could support me by putting a bit of money in my PayPal tip jar, that would be great. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.